We're live.
Yay!
Yay! Oh my God. Thank you so much for doing this with me because I feel like CS has been like a very exciting and overwhelming at the same time. I feel like.
Yeah, well, so we have to tell you guys the story. So we're at CES live
Yeah, we're at CES.
2025.
Yes.
We had Grace actually planned everything out, had a great room for us, and then
But
they actually shut down
the room.
CES early. So we're here. We're actually in a Starbucks, so you can see the really cool architecture and everything. But we are here in a Starbucks. We've got a live audience around us as well.
This is crazy.
Who's listening in?
Yeah.
And we're going to have fun today. So we're
Yes.
really happy that you joined in with us, right?
Yeah, totally. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. This is also our unusual time. So like I'm glad that people are here. But thank you so much for doing this.
Yeah.
With me. Okay, to kick it off, I want to say you're like the most one of the most like iconic women in tech, which is like, including AI, Web3 and everything else.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that.
Maybe we start with like, how did you get to where you are? So like before the IBM journey, where are you from, and what were some like core things that you've learned early on in your life that you kind of apply into your day-to-day life as the CEO of Ensemble Domain?
Yeah, well, it's really fascinating because I had a phenomenal family and a phenomenal set of friends who really helped me through a lot of different things. So when I was growing up, I wanted to be an astronaut. And Grace, the reason I wanted to be an astronaut is my dad, he would take me out, he bought me a telescope, we would go out and look at the stars and the moon. And it was just such an incredible experience that I thought I was going to be the first woman to walk on the moon. That's what I thought I was going to do.
You still can be. Honestly.
I could be.
You could be.
And so I thought that's what my life's mission was going to be. And then, of course, as I got a little older, I had a couple of people in my life who died. One of my grandfather died. One of my grandmothers died. And so then I thought, wow, there has to be something more we could have done for them. And so then I kind of switched from I'm going to go to the moon to I'm going to be a doctor. I'm going to help people. I'm going to do, some great things there. So I went to Duke to do that. And did really great at all the classes. And then came the kind of like one of the final tests or whatever. And you had to dissect something. And they used all the anesthetics and all the chemicals. And I'm allergic to them. And I didn't know that because I had never had surgery. I had really never been in a hospital except to visit someone. And so I went in to do this and boom, I was out. And they're like, oh my gosh, let's give her smelling salts. So they gave me smelling salts and I stood up and then boom, I was out. Like I'm really allergic to it. Yeah.
Oh, no.
And so can you imagine going to see your doctor and then having your doctor pass out? Like you have to take care of your doctor. Probably not a good thing, right? So my advisor at Duke was super cool. And one of the things that he said was, there's so many things that you can do and help people. And so he was a joint advisor between the medical school and the computer science school. So he got me interested in computer science. I did my senior thesis on how you can test drugs on a computer versus on an animal. Now that was way back when, right? So it was really cutting edge, really super cool. And that's how I got into computer science. So what was a lesson I learned there is, sometimes you set your heart on something and you can't do it. You have to pivot, you have to change. You have to rethink who you are. You have to reinvent who you are. And so that's something that I earned early on because really kind of went through 3 different careers, right? I was an astronaut, almost astronaut. I was an almost doctor. And then I was a computer scientist. So I think a lot of those things really shape who you are and how you handle them. And with my supportive family, I was really able to do that, I think, in a really great way.
Wow, I feel like I really like what you said about reinventing yourself. Even to this day, like I'm so impressed by like, how much you have like reshaped your, personal career trajectory. Because I feel like a lot of people at your stage, like they could just be comfortable, relaxing at like a big company. But I feel like you're keep taking on challenges in these like emerging tech categories. By the way, hi, LinkedIn user. We want to quickly feature your comment. Hi. Okay. So, I wonder, so like when you're thinking about your career trajectory, obviously you have a mentor like the professor or your parents, but who is on your personal board of advisors when it comes to like redesigning your self?
Well, it's interesting too, because, I've had, I started at IBM and I was doing artificial intelligence, which is what I had gone to school for. I also, went to Amazon Web Services, which is known for cloud. I'm now at a startup, which is doing blockchain. So my technical person on my board of advisors has kind of moved and changed with the technology that I've done. Also, as I've grown in what I learn and what I need to still do, that board of advisor also changes. So I always have someone who understands the technology. I always have men and women because I find I get very different advice from a woman I ask versus a man I ask. And then I try to, just like you have a board, I'm on the board of a company called Altair. And on that board, we have people who are chief financial officer, chief marketing officer, chief sales officer, chief technology officer. All the different functions are represented. I try to do the same thing in my personal life too, which is to have that good diversity of skill sets as well. So I think I have a great personal board that I use and leverage on a regular basis. I would say I probably don't have a mentor anymore, but I use the board because people are so busy. They just, they can't even commit to I want to mentor you for a year. And so the really cool thing is now I can just grab snippets of time, or I can call them up and say, making this big career change or making this big choice, or I have this big issue. Can you help me? And then they can jump in there and help as well.
I want to double click on, I really love what you said about, thinking about it like a company, like you're the company and then you have different boards, like sales, technology, everything else. But I wonder, you mentioned you have men and women. What would you say it's the core differences typically a man or woman give you?
It really varies by the situation. But, I find that, of course, I'm in tech. So a lot of the rooms that I go into, in fact, here at CES, I did 3 AI panels, AI and blockchain panels. And there were lines waiting out the door to get into the panels. And as I was walking by the lines, I noticed most of the people are men. And so they have one perspective of a situation, and they might give me different advice. There isn't one thing different that they say than women. It's just based on their experience. They give me a different perspective. I might make assumptions about something and they're like, oh no, that's not the right assumption to make. It's really this is how people think on a regular basis. And when they say people, they mean men. And so it's just really been beneficial for me to have men and women who have been that, that coach or that person I could go to on my board as well.
Oh my God. Love this. So I wonder, I feel what would you say is one skill that's your superpower, and how do you think about consolidating it into an unfair advantage versus is there a skill that you're constantly trying to get better at?
I would say my superpowers are around go-to-market. So how do you take something to market? What's the strategy? How do you continually look around, the door to see where things are going? And then how do you take that to market? How do you educate the market? How do you get them to level up? I think that's my big superpower. So if you look at it, even now at the company, I'm the COO. So essentially I have all the go-to-market activities, and the CEO really has all the engineering because that's his superpower. At Amazon, I really honed and focused in on go-to-market as well. And the same thing at IBM. It does not mean that I wasn't stretched. So when I first came into Amazon, one of the first things they did as an external VP, which was very different, by the way, they had me to manage a development team, an engineering team. Now, I had managed engineering teams at IBM. I had managed engineering teams at my own startup, but this was a large-scale engineering team. And so you learn different skills by doing that, by really understanding how do engineers think and what kind of questions can you ask. How can you add value with actually being a hardcore coder? So, I studied computer science and math, electrical engineering at Duke. But then, again, most of my skill sets have been on the go-to-market side. So it's been really interesting to see how you can be put in different situations and what you learn from them. I would say because I've been a chief sales officer, chief marketing officer, chief product manager, then I manage engineering. because I've had all those roles, I didn't stay in one function the whole time. Like I wasn't just marketing and marketing all the way up. I find that I'm more empathetic when I work with other teams because I've sat in their seat. I know how a chief sales officer feels. I know how the chief marketing officer feels. I know what the VP of Eng feels. And so I think that gives me a lot of really good data and empathetic data, right? I think EQ is really important these days.
For sure. I like that you're saying that, like, by having a lot of like different positions or like working on different things, it gives you like a lot of perspective so that it kind of improves your EQ because of it. I love that. So like when it comes to, okay, so I want to name some of your accomplishments. Maybe we could go through like, okay, the first one is like when at AWS you lead your team to like, you generated over 5 billion revenue and then 55% year-over-year growth. So to achieve like the certain level of growth, maybe we could can you walk us through like maybe the first day at AWS, like how are you thinking about the business versus like, things that you feel like you personally could improve versus, if they hire like a different person, like, basically identify the things that you need to do to get your job done and doing great things.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, Grace, because when I first came into Amazon, I came in with 0 people. 0 people. I think that's pretty interesting for Amazon to bring you in with a 0 headcount to start with. And of course, if you know the Amazon way, Amazon is really a great company. And what they do is they have you write a narrative so that you can build up your team based on a business idea. Consider it just like you are, you're creating a startup. Like I feel like I created startup after startup after startup inside of Amazon. I think that's probably the key to their success. And so for me, I think what I learned a lot of was, one, to be very humble. I came in with 0 people. I had a lot of VPs go, "Oh my God, you have no people. Like, why aren't you have many people?" And I had to write a narrative and get everything going. I think that was interesting. I think another learning at Amazon that I had that was very different than anything else that I'd ever experienced. Every other company I'd worked for, they were like, "Okay, Sandy, we want you to come do a presentation on your best practices," right? Like most people come in, like even here at CES, right? How many presentations did you sit through that were, here's my lessons learned, here's all the great things I did and how I did them so that you too can replicate them. Amazon does that, but they take another tack that I think is very different and unique, which is, how did you fail and how did you recover? And so I still remember after 6 months, I had to go into a big meeting with just all the rest of the VPs, like 55 people. And I had to present what I had failed at and how I had recovered. And I fought against that like over and over and over again. I did not want to do that. I kept going, "Oh, here, look at these. These are 3 best practices. Let me present that. Oh, we don't want to do that. Let's do this thing right here." They're like, "No, you're going to do what you failed at." And so I did the presentation, Grace. And one of the things that was really quite fascinating, I think, is that when I left 5 years later and people, they held a party for me, people came up to me and they said, "The most impactful thing I remember is that presentation you did on your failures." On your failures. Like, why would they think about, I thought that was just so interesting. And they said, "Look, you've done incredible things here. Like you've grown a business, you've got new partners, new customers for us. You got us, into some of the new AI areas. But that presentation stopped me from making the same mistake and stopped many of my friends from making the same mistake." So I think that's really interesting. It's not something that I would naturally do. Most people don't want to share what they failed at, but I thought that was a really nice example of something that you need to do.
Wow, I like that. I feel like all the Gen Z audience can probably relate. I feel like it's all about transparency nowadays, like on the internet, building in public, and then like show like your wins or loses. So like it kind of like it's a way to build trust when basically people can learn, like you said, like learn from your mistake, as well as like just like in general felt like relatable. I think relatability is like a big component in today's internet universe. So let's go to the second. I'm sorry, I'm making it so structured.
And sorry, you're going to hear they're actually physically taking down the booths in CES.
Yes.
So when you hear that noise, it's not us and our stomach's not growling. That's actually them taking down the booths and everything.
Yeah. Thank you, the audience, for like the prompt response.
Yeah.
I love
this comment though here. I'm going to do that about my life journey, a failure presentation. It really opens your eyes, and it's very hard. It's very humbling to walk through what you failed at, how you failed, why you failed, and what you did to recover. I think more importantly, what you did to recover,
For sure.
Yeah.
So back in IBM, so where you spent over 13 years, so you have built the business to do like $7 billion in revenue.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So where you built like, AI, cloud, and many different products. So maybe, at a company, like I guess like a lot of the listeners, maybe they are working in a tech company. How do they first of all like pick the project that's interesting, and how, like, I'm sure like, not everyone can be like the VP of AWS or, work on the most exciting thing. How do you like, I guess like work your way into the project that you actually want to work on?
Sorry, the construction worker just waved at me over there. So I was like, I've never had a podcast or whatever where I got people waving at me as we're doing it. So anyway, I think he liked what I said because he also gave me a thumbs up. So that's good. Well, here's what I would say is that, at IBM, I made my reputation on thinking differently, right? Wild ducks fly differently. They do things differently. And I was known as a wild duck inside of the IBM ecosystem because I wasn't just accepting of the way things were because we did them all that way. I really helped create a lot of things that were very different in the market. And so I think if you are, I always thought of myself as I'm an entrepreneur. I'm going to create my own business. My dad was an entrepreneur, so he really had to run his business and make sure everything supported itself. So I never had the idea when I came in that I was just doing this little itsy bitsy piece of the puzzle. I was looking at broader things. So I'll give you an example. When I came into IBM for the first time, I was a product manager. And so they said, hey, we want you to write requirements for a bank teller. Here's some books to read, read them and then, write up some requirements so we can build a product. And I thought, oh my gosh, I've never been a teller. Like, how am I going to figure out what a teller goes through, like what they feel and where their stops are and what's going on, where are the gaps, that sort of thing. And so I knew a friend of mine who worked at what is now Bank of America. And so he asked his manager, hey, could my friend come and work as a bank teller for 2 weeks? Because she's going to be writing product requirements for a teller product. And so instead of just reading the manuals, I went and worked as a teller.
Oh, wow.
And IBM was like, whoa, that's so cool. Like, you're working as a teller. They actually sent a little film crew in and I was doing my teller stuff. And I learned so much because when we crafted the requirements for the product, I could talk about why it needed to be that way and why it couldn't be this way and why that mattered for a teller in their everyday business, something that I really never could have learned from just reading a manual or training manual. And so, that's kind of how I became a wild duck. It seemed like every new assignment, I would go like, oh, I can't do it that way. I need to do it this way. So let me think of a different way to do it. And so, our teller product became wickedly successful. And why? Because we were customer obsessed. We really put ourselves in the customer's shoes, which is what I also adopted at AWS. Their whole leadership principle is customer obsession, right?
Yeah.
Customer obsession. And so anyway, you can think about how would you do it? Like, not just, okay, somebody told me do it this way and therefore they know more, so I'm just going to do it that way. I love it when people, even on my team, come to me and say, hey, you suggested this, but I want to do it that way. I'm like, well, try it, like experiment with it. See if that works. It might work better than what I suggested. I think that's a great way to look at something, but always being customer obsessed. Like, you're not doing it just to do it. You're not doing it just for fun. You're doing it because you want to understand your customer better.
I really agree. I feel like the audience that hands-on is like irreplaceable. I think it seems like you're a really like outside of the box thinker, and that you don't mind to like roll up your sleeves to like do these like things to understand the customer, as well as like um, do the customer research basically. And I wonder, when you are thinking about um, like emerging technology, because one thing I feel like you have many other executives are maybe like shying of, it's like you're super brave, you jump into these like emerging things, and then you have the media sense really well. Like you joined like the companies when before they were like taking up big, and then you sense these like technology that could take off. Like how do you think about which company to join, and how do you think about like how to learn about, for example, like a Web3 technology? Maybe you went hands-on early, but like how do you actually understand the technology that's like very innovative, new, and it's like not even established? Like how do you kind of make the correct decision to jump into something, company A versus company B, as well as like evaluating these, understand the business model of these technology before you make bigger moves.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because, um, you know, I just love tech. I love new tech. And I don't jump on every new tech, but some of them I just see as very transformative.
Right.
And so I want to be a part of it. I think it comes from, you know, I always want my customers to have the very best. And if I think that next technology is going to move the needle for them, then I want to be able to have that at my fingertips so that I can educate them. And so, there's no magic to it. I think I jumped on IoT a little too early. Now it's awesome, right? Because IoT generates the data that you need for AI. But I haven't been perfect for sure. But I do think that understanding new technologies and getting in early really helps you, because then you learn not just after the fact, you get to create the playbook. And that's what I really love, right? So like when I came into blockchain and Web3, there was no freaking playbook about how to do it. And I love that. When we did Watson at IBM, there was no playbook. Like we had to figure it out, even from figuring out building our ecosystem, like what business model could we use? We're not going to incentivize them as a normal ecosystem. We needed something different. And so when we started, we did a percentage of revenue. None of the startups for Watson actually paid us money for the technology. We took a percentage of their company. Of course, then when it took off, we had to back away from that, because that was a lot of revenue. And so I think it's just being willing to say, this worked for this amount of time. It's not going to work forever. I see a lot of people who say, oh, I did this and this got me success on these 3 times, so it's going to bring me success on the 4th. It doesn't always mean that it's going to bring you that success in the 4th area. In fact, my word for this is next practices. So not just thinking about best practices, which you do need to work with and draw upon. That really helps you accelerate. But what is the next practice that you want to set, that someone else is going to look at and say, I need to do that. That's now a best practice. So what's that next thing, and how do you do that? How do you create that playbook?
Okay, so I really love that. Like, I feel like the next practice is, so basically you actually reinvent, or like you invent the playbook for other people to follow. But I feel like that will also, like, I guess, like, how do you mentally process, like, how to invent the playbook? It means that maybe like you have the chance 500 things to see if something stick, or like how do you implement the lessons that you already learned from the IBM, AWS of the world into a startup? Because I feel like a lot of people who are listening, maybe they want to start their own startup and they are already working in tech, but a lot of like the big tech stuff, startup don't have the resources or practices. How do you kind of like bring that into the startup world?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things you can do and look at. I think that what is interesting is that as you're looking at these next things, and as you're trying to figure out what to do around them, is to think about the customer. Always work backwards from the customer. think about how they might use it, even thinking of different ways that they might use it that might be more beneficial. There are some basics that I think are always applicable, like working backwards, for example. I think those type of things would be tried and true that you always want to do, but the way that you work backwards on the customer might change. So, for example, let's take artificial intelligence, right? So we're here at CES, and we saw a lot of humanoids, a lot of robots doing tasks. And so you might want to think about, okay, so let's say that I'm ordering a pizza. Okay, I'm going to order a pizza. And instead of a person coming to deliver the pizza, let's just say that it's a humanoid. I actually saw a couple of humanoids delivering things. So the humanoid comes in to my house, delivers a pizza, takes crypto at the door, comes in and sets the table for me. And then we saw the robot that does the dishes. So now thinking about that as a customer, what are the changes that you see in that space? Well, it's not just for the end user, like the person, who has someone to do their dishes. And we've talked about this at lunch. Yeah. We're so excited for that. But now think about, okay, so now the robot comes in your house to set the dishes. Who selects those dishes? Like, are you now being sold by the person who sells dishes, or is now the robotics company talking to you? When they serve the Coke or the Pepsi, who is Coke and Pepsi now selling to because of that change? Are they now selling to you as the person who ordered the pizza, or are they selling to the robot company and that learning model? I'll just do one more. Someone's doing, the robot's doing dishes. Does the robot pick the detergent that they're going to use? Does P&G now need to talk about how they're going to influence the learning model versus the person? So that's what I mean by thinking ahead. Like, it's not just the obvious, it's the non-obvious changes too. Oh, and this is another one. I went to one of the displays here, and this was a humanoid that was supposed to come into your house and do your house cleaning. Again, I'm all for that. But I was looking at the base of the robot, and I was like, I don't think you could get through some of my doors in my house. And he's like, oh, wow, you're right. That's interesting. We thought about coming through the front door, and I don't know if you guys know this, but on average in the US, your front door is about 6 inches wider than other doors in your home. So yeah, I could get through the front door, but then I want to, definitely you got to clean my bathroom. How are you going to get into my bathroom? And so does that mean we have to redesign the robot, or is that also going to impact architects of houses? Are they now going to build houses differently to have a robot that comes in? I don't know. I mean, these are the types of things to me that are really interesting questions that you have to start thinking through to change the game, right? Not just, okay, now a robot's delivering you a pizza, so what changes for you? But all the changes that are going to be impacted because of that particular change.
Wow, I feel like that's like definitely really interesting to think about. Think ahead of the game to think well-roundedly about like every step of the way to. Yeah, I feel like I share like the same observation. I was looking at the Samsung table, and they basically think of like, for example, if you're like trying to cut down your glucose intake, maybe there's like you wear like a monitor, and then the monitor is connected to your fridge that whenever you grocery shop, you would like put in, let's say, broccoli or like salmon or whatever like into the fridge, and then the fridge will also track, like give you like based on your macro of the statistics of your own body to suggest the macro that you're going to consume, and they're going to suggest recipes, turn on your oven, tell you the recipe, and like you're like basically you're supposed to follow that. I feel like it's something really interesting and really cool, but like you said, like it also creates like new way of living, and then they're in like every different ways, and then like from the consumer or like from the sales perspective, like who do you sell to? And then nowadays I've been thinking about like in the future, ChatGPT replace how we search. In the past we put something on Google. Google Ads is like a place where people kind of get the recommendations, but in the future maybe like the ChatGPT will just suggest one thing, and then that thing is like probably the biggest sponsor of the ChatGPT, but I don't know. I feel
It
like,
is true because, Sam, who is the CEO of ChatGPT, was thinking about allowing advertisement
Mhm.
for this area for ChatGPT. So, I was thinking, okay, let's say I wanted to buy this green blazer, right? I could go online and say, hey, I'm looking for a green blazer. But instead of giving me like overall, like Switzerland, right, neutral answers, now there's like the green blazer company they're going to recommend to me.
Right.
Now that's kind of a silly example because when you get to healthcare or when you get to other things, it really has impact. But yes, I really worry about things like that and really thinking through all the implications of these changes that are getting ready to come upon us. And now is the best time, like your listeners and your viewers, now is such a crucial time. Like as you walked around CES, it was, AI in your home, AI in healthcare, AI in elderly care, AI in your food, AI was everywhere. So now that AI is everywhere, now you've got to rethink so many things. What a great time to be in this space, to come up with a startup and to really, figure out what you want to do here, right? We heard on one panel I was on, one of the questions was, will we have AI agents working for us? And I thought, yeah, that's right. Like we might have a whole team of AI agents. And how do you manage a team like of AI agents, right? Are you now just an HR department head when you're doing that? It was quite interesting, I think.
Yeah, it's gonna be the AI manage the AI. So the other day I watched a video. Literally, someone was talking about they went out meeting, so their note taker was taking notes from the other note taker, and no human showed up. It's like the Firefly, and then like all the AI agent was having a conversation. Yeah, I feel like it's definitely something interesting to think about. So another topic.
And then let me just bring up one more point on this, which I thought was really interesting. So we were chatting, and one person on one of my panels said, it's really great because these models are now 85% accurate. And so as I was sitting there listening to him talk, I was like, that's fascinating because, if you think about that, do you want your finance to be 85% accurate?
Yeah.
Do you want your supply chain to be 85% accurate? You might lose $1 million a day. Do you want your doctor to be 85% accurate, right? You don't. Now, you might have some of that today, but with AI, you really want to get closer. And so I started diving in. In fact, one night I stayed up till 2 a.m. while I was here thinking, how could you close the gap on that 85%? And I think a lot of it is data that you use personally, like from your company, that could bridge that gap for you. So you don't have to have 85%, you can have closer to 100%. Anyway, I just, my mind's just I love CES. If anybody out there has not been to CES, I try to make it a must-attend event for me because it's like you're glimpsing into the future. There are some things you're going to see here that you will never see the light of day, but the overall combination, you're like, wow, this is really interesting, and it just gets your mind going in different directions.
For sure. I think it's definitely very inspiring to see a lot of especially the hardware come into places. You always read about or watch on a YouTube channel about the dish cleaning robots or other things so for example, I don't know, the other day I see a smart flower case, I don't know, so there's just a lot of things that make you think about the future and how AI and other emerging technology that can actually apply into our daily life. So another topic that I prepared for us is I think you're an expert in a few things. Maybe I would say brand building or reinventing yourself. It's one of those. What does your content diet look like to kind of educate yourself, and then maybe not even just what you read or listen, but it's more of the experiences that you felt actually impacted how you're thinking about different things.
So, one of the leadership principles at Amazon is this principle of continuous learning.
Right.
So I'm always reading stuff, you've got your phone here with you at all times, right? So you can be reading constantly about something new that's going on. I try to educate myself. I block 30 minutes actually every day on my calendar just to read something that I would not expect to read. So for example, last week I was reading about these new micro dramas. So a friend of mine is an actress, and she was like, "Oh man, these micro dramas are hot right now." And we were talking, and I got off the phone with her, and I'm like, "What is a micro drama?" They're really hot right now in China. It's like do you know about them?
I know.
Microdramas?
Yeah. My mom sent me those like podcasts about microdrama. I know a little bit. Like I'm not an expert in microdrama. Like yes, they're popular.
But it's becoming popular, yeah, and they expect it to move from China to the rest of the world.
Yeah, I already seen a lot of ads on Instagram. Literally, like it was like the most like crazy romance stuff. It's like the Titanic, but in like 3 minutes.
Yeah,
I don't understand these stuff, but it's like really engaging. It's like really interesting.
Really cool though. So I think the interesting thing is, okay, so it's not just about learning about microdramas, but you know, when I hear something and I don't know what it is, I don't just let it wash by me. I like have a notebook. I actually still write things on my hand, and I have tons of notes in here. And I'm like, okay, I want to learn about that. So like one of my 30 minutes, I went and I just learned everything about a microdrama. I just read an article for Forbes on my top 10 predictions for 2025, and I included microdrama in there. That comment could have just, it was just a friendly chat with my friend, right? So I could have just let it go, but I like grasped onto it, and I want to learn more about it. So I would say everybody here hears things like that all the time. In fact, this is something really interesting, Grace. So a friend of mine is a professor at Stanford. She did a bunch of research about innovators. So like, Jeff Bezos and Steve Jobs when he was alive, Elon Musk, all these great innovators. And she was like, is there one thing that just differentiates them from everything else? And so what she found out is that they ask a lot of questions. Now, I've gone through reviews with Andy and Jeff. They ask a lot of questions. But what she found is that a child asks on average over 100 questions a day. You know that because you've got a child.
Exactly.
Wait.
Yeah.
Your baby. He's gonna be like asking you, why is the sky blue? Why are they doing that? What's going on over there? And we lose some of that when we become adults. We ask many less questions. And they found the best innovators, the best people out there, they just ask a lot of questions. They're very curious. They hear a word and they want to either know it directly or go Google it later, or go, use Perplexity or Chat GPT or something to figure out what is this. And I think that's really the secret to staying ahead is doing that. I also participate in a couple of CEO roundtables on AI, which is very eye-opening because they're so far away from the tech. They ask very different questions that helps me understand, okay, I love tech. You and I are here. They weren't here. So I have to back up for them. I have to educate them. I have to do these things for them. So I just try to participate, reading, I listen, I am an active presence in some of these roundtables so that I just learn, and then I can apply.
I really love what you said about I feel like it sounds like you really take action. Like after you hear something, you would be the person who Googles it and then take notes and then really put it into either use case or into a thought journey that you kind of document it. I wonder when you are learning something new about industry, and I wonder are you do you have what's the best way to frame it? So let's say if you decided to since you joined Ensemble Domain when it was kind of very new and then you're trying to figure these things out, who would be the expert that you go to understand, or what's the question that you really ask yourself on the business model or on the use case that you kind of would have to convince yourself to jump into something?
Yeah, sometimes I reach out to people who are in the field, for example, like I said, when I was doing the banking requirements, I reached out to a bank and I talked to the teller. When I was at Amazon, all the time, I would reach out to the customer. And the customer for me wasn't the company, right? It was the person in the company who was doing what I wanted to help someone do.
Right.
And so I went to the person, and I found people are, I think at the core, most people are generally nice. They want to do good things. And so I'll even reach out on LinkedIn sometimes and ask questions like, hey, I was thinking about this. Would this work? And get their opinion. Knowing that sometimes, people like what they're doing and change is hard. And so they're going to initially say no. A lot of times I've gotten on the phone with someone who's an expert and I would tell them an idea and they're like, no, you're crazy. That would never work. And then later, 2 or 3 days later, they'll call me back and they're like, I've been thinking, I can't get that idea out of my head. How exactly would that work? What would that look like? And then I'm like, I've got something here. I know that this is a good idea.
I like that you talk to the customer and then you kind of process it by like gathering feedback, and then also just like you start with like doing things, then like you sit there, think about stuff. I think that's really cool. And I wonder, when it comes to, okay, so I want to change the topic a little bit on some like this other things that I noticed that you're really good at, which is like revenue generation. So now you're the COO, but before that, you work on multiple hats in different projects. So I feel like revenue generation, or like thinking, even as an executive, even you don't directly work with the revenue team.
So the revenue team right now reports to me.
Exactly.
Yep.
So like basically, everybody has to think about revenue generation as a
C-suite. Yeah.
So how do you think about the strategy that you want to implement and to grow something, and also the day-to-day kind of like, for example, let's say this year your revenue target is X dollar, and what is like how do you think about it? Is that like the 3 core things that you could implement to accelerate the revenue, or like are you a testing person, like let's like throw 200 things into the wall and then see if anything sticks? What would be like your thought process into growing revenue?
So I find that a lot of times customers will come up with an idea for my product that I never would have thought about. So what I typically do at the end of the year, things kind of die down. I try to take a look at, what did my customers do with my product? Was there any common thing that they were doing that I'm actually not talking to other customers about? Maybe would say selling to other customers. And I usually come up with 2 or 3 gems out of that list. Like, I didn't even think about doing this. This is super cool. I want to execute this. Or I'm going to test this out on a couple other customers. I think this is really interesting. And if another customer saw it, then they may want to do the same thing. So I do feel like it's really about looking at what your current customers are doing and how they can do it better. I also think that a lot of times, you have to adjust as you go. You have to listen, One of my favorite CEOs is Jim Scalpa at Altair. I'm on the board of Altair. I think he's an excellent CEO. And if you ask me why I think that, one of the things that he does exceptionally well is he listens. He listens to his employees. He listens to what they're telling him. He listens to his customers and what they're telling him. And because he's listening so much, he's able to make changes and adjust. And I think a great seller, a great go-to-market leader listens more than they talk. When I jump on a call with a customer, and even at my level, I still do multiple customer calls because I always want to understand what's going on at the ground level. You can tell when you're presenting something, this is not right to the customer. And if you had listened first, right, if you'd go in, I teach my reps to go in and listen, ask questions like, what's your biggest pain point? What's your biggest struggle? And then gear the presentation to what they're struggling with, and not tell them about the other 15% that doesn't matter to them, right? So I do think listening is another big key point to that as well.
For sure. Especially, I feel like I like what you said about listening from your customer, and really like get the idea from the customer as well. I wonder, when it comes to like making like a number or a prediction, like I feel like as a founder myself, like I think it's super hard to predict each year what would be it's called like revenue generation, or like the direction that you want to go to. How do you kind of like, do you have like a set target that like you have to meet versus like, you just adjust along the way? I feel like it's super hard because I feel like coming from the Web3 world, I think the emerging technology changes so fast. Like, you could try to implement something, but the next month, this thing is already replaced by ChatGPT. So I guess, how do you come up with like a specific number on the target? And then would you just, let's say if the number is like too short, obviously you can move it to like a bigger number, but like when the number is like too hard to hit, how do you kind of like justify on the team to be like, hey, let's like go for something more realistic?
Yeah, and I think the big key there is everybody has a boss, right? Like even when you're in a startup, you've got a board. So
yeah, exactly.
You can't just be willy-nilly changing numbers, but you can change the approach to hit the number or to not hit the number. And I think that's where a lot of people fail, is they say, okay, I've got a target for first quarter. Oh, I hit first quarter. I'm going to do the same thing for second quarter. But as you said, things in this emerging market change so fast, right? And so if they're changing that fast, what you did in first quarter may not work in second quarter. So what can you do to change it in second quarter to generate different revenue, more revenue, that sort of thing? And so I don't think there's any magic. I think it just involves listening, watching your customer value and seeing. And then I would say also always being happy this has closed caption. Sorry, I hope you guys can hear us. Sorry if you didn't catch it early on. Yeah. We are here at CES, the room that Grace had scoped out and planned so diligently. Got closed down early today, so we're actually sitting in a Starbucks doing this. So
the Starbucks closed, by the way, and then the like upstairs, literally, yeah, exactly. And then people upstairs are literally tearing down all the booths. So we're here. You're literally in live with us. Like this.
Yeah, we actually have live people sitting around us too, listening in to the podcast. So anyway, I think that's kind of what you need to do. And then if you're not going to make your number, always communicate that, right? I know I have people who, I know this at every company I've worked at, that aren't going to make their number, but they're afraid to say something. And so then they wait till the very end, and that's really tough, right? Because most people don't like those kind of surprises. I like other kind of surprises and not those kind of surprises. So that's what I would say. Yeah, I think the great word here, and I've seen it come up now a couple of times, is adapting.
For sure.
Pivoting. And I think, for my daughters, their favorite book was Alice in Wonderland. And I used to love to read it to them. But there's one quote in there that I really love where Alice said, I had to run twice as fast just to stay in place. I had to run just as fast so I can just stay in place. And I feel like that's what we're doing. We have to run much faster to stay in place, which means we're learning and adapting and changing much faster. The term I use is exponential, baby. We're now changing at an exponential rate. So we just have to learn to change and move and groove as well. Sorry, I got another wave from the construction worker. So I think we're doing good. The construction team here really likes what we're saying.
Exactly. I love that. I feel like you're such a fascinating person, like just because like I feel like I see you, like obviously I follow you on the internet for a while, and I feel like I constantly see you on the go mode. Like what would you say is your biggest like motivation? Just because I mean I would probably retire if I'm like at your position previously, not retire but like retire in big tech. But like how do you think about the next steps, and then what's a motivation that like you have for yourself to keep hustling hard? Because I think you are showing up at like so many different places even at your stage, so that's like really something that I want to like do when like getting to that stage. But yeah,
I would say that you've got to have internal motivation, and for me it's always about learning. Like part of the reason I don't want to miss CES is that there's so many new things. I don't want to be the one left behind. I want to be the one leading in the front and adding value. I think I just love people, and I love getting out and chatting with them, helping them to figure out how they can improve. One of my mentors said, always reach back and pull someone with you. Always reach back and pull someone with you. And so that's really what I always want to do. I want to be that person that's helping others learn, that's keeping myself fresh and moving forward.
I wonder, so like how do you, I guess, like think about like there's like, I mean, at your position, okay, so I want to maybe dive into like the board member piece. So since you are on the board of a company, what do you see as like things that you feel like people constantly pulling you for help with? And since you're the go-to-market expert, how do you kind of like adapt the different strategy that you've learned into, advising companies? I'm sure, like, beside the official board title, you probably have, 600 other people asking you for advice on their AI startups or whatnot. Like, is there like a common pattern that you are seeing startups are doing that, um, that's interesting, and something that's like maybe a common thing that people do but actually should not?
I would say one of the interesting things is that a lot of startups start with the technology. And so they build something and then they don't know how to take it to market. And in fact, I just read a report that said more than 70% of companies fail, not because the product's not good, but because they don't take it to market in the right way. So most people, when they come to me for advice on go to market. How can I create a new category? How can I market this better? What can I do to really drive this home? How can I educate my users? How can I build a community? You've built so many great communities. How can I build a great community? So those are typically the types of questions I get. And they're really all on the go-to-market side. I typically don't get a lot of questions on, how is this technology working? I will get questions on, Sandy, here's what my product does. How do you think that we could apply AI to it to get it to produce higher return on investment, better outcomes, that sort of things as well. So those are the typical questions that I get asked. I will tell you, the CEO of Altair put me on the audit committee too. I've learned a lot on the audit committee because now, the audit committee is all about the numbers. And, for any business, you've got to tie what the customer wants to your numbers. They both have to work out to be really successful. And so I have recently learned a lot from that and what he's brought me into with this audit committee as well.
I wonder, so like, what are some numbers that you would find? I guess like the other thing is like, I feel like as a founder, I collect a lot of numbers, but I feel like it's hard to figure out what's the most important thing to chase from the metrics perspective. Obviously, like, not metrics, metric perspective.
Yeah.
Why would I choose a metric? But so how do you think about, for example, I mean, I generally just look at like what the customer would want to look at. Let's say, they are looking for, reaching X amount of customers, or, the close rate. And then like, I wonder, but as a founder, you're generally very clueless from the big picture perspective because you're in the trenches on a day-to-day basis. What are something that you should be chasing in terms of the numbers, and like why you should chase them? I know it's like a super meta question, but maybe
I'm going to have to say it depends on what you should be chasing. So, for example, some business are community driven, and so it may be more important to seed your community and not worry about your revenue right away, but worry about your number of community members and your engagement. And other businesses, you've got to start to get that revenue and that profit right away. And so then you have to focus on that. And in some, you're focused on profit. So there's all kinds of strategies around what you're doing. And I think, I couldn't be generic and say, always look at these three numbers. Obviously, you're going to look at your revenue and your profit all the time. But other than that, going down into it really depends on what your business model is built on. Think about some of the companies that have been out there, even like, DoorDash and Uber and Airbnb. They gave away a bunch at first. They weren't making any money. Even Amazon, right? How long was it before Amazon was actually making money? Because Jeff knew that the network effect and having that flywheel that got started on that was going to be going so fast that no one could disrupt that, right, and come in. So you really have to understand your business model, what you're trying to do, and then figure out from there what the right metrics are to look at.
Since you were in charge of revenue at multiple different places, like how do you think about the long-term and short-term revenue generation? Just because, you're as a board member or as a leader, you want to see your team generate something this year versus like, there's obviously like Jeff Bezos is like very famously like, Amazon was not profitable for a while. And, nowadays it's like one of the most like important company from the revenue perspective, especially. How do you think about the long-term versus short-term play for the company that you're involved with?
So you have to really plot out what you want to do, like by first quarter, and then see if those metrics turned out right or not before you project longer term. I think you need to have a longer term vision. So my longer term vision is that, I'm going to be selling books to everybody. Well, in order to do that, that means that I've got to get my costs down. So in order to get my costs down, that means I have to work on my supply chain, which might take me 6 months. So in the first quarter, then I want to focus on generating as much revenue, because I know, even though I'm not going to be profitable in the first quarter, when I get those expenses down in the 6 month, that I'm going to be having profit. So it's really like a chess game, right? You have to think through your short-term goals have to support your long-term goals. Sometimes those will change based on what is coming later on. So again, there's no easy answer. There is just no easy answer.
For sure. What's your day-to-day like as the CEO of Superpowers?
Oh, it's super fun. Some days I'll start the day with the pudgy penguins. I never thought I'd be saying, I'm starting my meeting with pudgy penguins. And then, I'm looking at numbers. I'm doing daily calls with my team, just to, stand-ups. So I can remove, part of my job is to remove any obstacle that they see that's in their way. I got to get it out of the way for them. Sometimes it is, doing a podcast like this, right? Like sharing expertise. Sometimes it's speaking at a conference, traveling, going to see a customer, doing outbound calls to get new information. So it really varies. One of the things I really like is that I couldn't say this is my typical day, and out of the 350 days that we work a year, it looks like this 90% of the time. It really doesn't. My day's just all jumbled up and different.
For sure. I feel like first of all, I just have so much respect on how many things that you're doing, especially looking outside. I was like, oh my God, you are at all these major conferences speaking and sharing your knowledge, as well as you're doing so many hands-on things to helping the business to grow. I wonder when you're thinking about since you joined Ensemble Domain at a fairly early stage when they started, and I wonder, how do you think about at what point you want to see, because I feel I want to give some context to the startup audience or the audience in general. Mm-hmm. So at different startups, I feel I interact with a lot of founders. The founding team always cancel out projects that are you're not immediately seeing traction. How do you think about you mentioned the Jeff Bezos flywheel thing that take years to see some sort of result? But I feel the founders that I have seen, a lot of people would just cancel out on a product that was not getting enough traction in the first week. Is there any best practices on selecting the project that you're doing versus dropping something that you're doing?
You have to have the guts to really go into something. And if you really believe in it, stay with it. However, if you go in, you've got to expect that you're going to fail a certain amount of time, right? And so if you're not willing to kill that project that's not doing well, you're never going to be successful, because you don't have enough resources to do everything that you want, especially to stick with projects that may not be successful. And so I think you have to go in with the mindset of, okay, this is the project and these are the goals I want. So Jeff didn't go in and say, oh, I'm just going to lose money. He said, this is my long-term goal. And I know I can get here, in a year, or I know I can get here in a half a year. And therefore, I'm going to lose money here. I'm going to do these projects here until I get there, because that's my long-term goal. So I think if you just look at a short-term goal in a silo, it's going to be an issue or a problem. I think you've got to look at it and judge it in a long term, but be prepared. And it's the hardest thing to kill a project. It's so much harder than starting it, right? There's so much energy, there's excitement. Everybody wants to start a project, but then killing it is a hard task. So you have to have the guts to do that. I think that's how successful projects go. Look at Jeff Bezos, right? We started a phone. The phone failed miserably, but we didn't keep on it because
the fire phone?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Remember?
Oh my God. Yeah.
And so we did not, we looked at short-term goals and where we could be long-term, and we decided not to do it. It wasn't the right thing. So you do have to make sure that you are deciding this is my short-term goal. Like once I get here for the long-term goal, I can make it. But if you don't, you got to be okay with killing it. Yes, I see this thing about Retardio. We did just start supporting Solana. And so the first thing we did with Solana is we minted which is another meme coin. And we did announce today Retardio. Yes. So look at you. See? You knew it was coming. You knew what was going on, and you knew how this was going to be impactful. You nailed it. I think sometimes, people around you will say you're crazy. And I think if you can hold to what you believe, if you really believe it and you've got that gumption around it, then you just need to do it.
Love that. I also want to be mindful of the time. I know you have another 5 things going on. Why don't we wrap up with a 1-minute fire round?
Okay.
What's your favorite book?
My favorite book? It's The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team. It's written as a business fable. And what I really, really, really like about it is it shows you how to build a successful team, because there's nothing you can do as a founder, as an executive, that doesn't come with a team. So I love that book. It's a little bit older, but the principles still apply. He's been updating the book. It's really excellent. If you haven't read it, definitely go and read that book.
Who made the biggest impact in your career?
I don't know if it was an impact on my career. I would say it's an impact on the way I think, which impacted my career. My grandmother. So believe it or not, so I'm 5'8", so I'm very tall. My grandmother was 4'8". She was a foot shorter than me. She played basketball. At 4'8", she played basketball, and she just told me you could do whatever you needed to do. My dad told me you could do whatever you wanted to do. I think that really drove me for success in many parts of my career.
I love that.
You can do it.
You can do it.
Yep.
Yeah. I think like having the self-confidence is like the base of everything. And obviously you are the queen at that. Who would you invite to your dinner party?
Sorry, again?
Who would you invite to your dinner party?
I still don't know.
Your dinner party?
Oh, my dinner party. Who would I want at my dinner party? I definitely want Elon Musk. I heard him speak at South by Southwest, and I went to a Tesla store, and who did I run into in the Tesla store but Elon Musk? I think he's just brilliant. Most people might do one pretty cool thing in their lifetime. He's done so many, so I would love to have him at my dinner party.
I was listening to his biography.
Oh, you were?
Yeah. He's like just like a really bold, fearless guy.
Yeah. And I love the fact that he just really doesn't care what anybody else thinks on. Now, that's not true of his team. His team is super loyal to him. He knocks down barriers for his team. He comes in once a week to all his companies and says, what's the biggest thing that I can tear down for you today? I love that. But if he really believes something's possible, he's going to do it. He doesn't care if you call him stupid or whatever. He's going to get it done. And I love that.
Love that. Where can we find you outside of work?
Outside of work. So I love to swim. I love to travel. So I'm at 89 countries right now. My goal is to visit 100. So I just plotted out how I'm going to get to 100 in the next 5 years. So that's one of the things I want. And thankfully, I just got invited to keynote in Chile, which is one of the countries I haven't been to. So I'm going to go to Chile and then visit some of the surrounding countries there to knock that off. So I love to travel. I love to read. Of course, we talked about that earlier. Those are kind of the things. And then, of course, my 2 daughters and my husband. I love my family, taking care of my mom as well. Like I'm very family oriented.
I feel you. I feel like you have everything. So like you have like a super successful career and a family, healthy, and just like you're working on the coolest projects.
I am.
Yeah, you are. I know. I feel like that's such a dream. And audience, I know that like actually we have over 100 different countries of audience. So if you're listening to this, please invite us to speak in your country. Yeah. So we could hit the 100 goal. But anyway, thank you guys so much for joining. And I super appreciate the people who actually leave comments. And you guys are awesome. And we're going to have more CS content maybe next week coming up. But thank you so much. Have a wonderful day. Bye, guys.
See ya. And thank you so much for putting up with all the things happening around us and for being so adaptable. We love it. Thank you.
Love it. Thank you so much.